Hello, everyone. In these set of videos, I'm going to go over chapter 10, which is social psychology. And social psychology essentially focuses on the interactions between you and other people, your friends, your family, society, culture, and how those things are going to affect your mind and your behavior. In this first video, I'm going to focus on some of the ways that we acquire our attitudes. Um, when I talk about attitudes, I'm talking about three specific things. Uh, your cognitive attitudes, what you think, your behavioral attitudes, the way you behave, and your affective attitudes, which is the way you feel about things. Um, and we would all like to believe that the way we behave, the way that we think, and the way that we feel is directly related to our beliefs, to our logical conclusions. And the truth is that a lot of times, a lot of your attitudes are just not like that. You didn't come to them logically, and you didn't come to them because of your goals or your values. So, how did we come across most of our attitudes? Well, one of the ways that attitudes are shaped in people is just normal classical conditioning, just like we went over in chapter 6. I'm going to give you a couple of examples. We're going to pretend that it is the 1980s and, people wear kind of urban wear, hoodies and athletic shorts or baggy jeans, baggy clothes. Well, when your parents were a little bit younger, maybe your grandparents in the 80s, obviously seeing someone with urban wear really would have not created any kind of response because the way somebody dresses is just the way somebody dresses. So the way someone dresses is a neutral stimulus. But what happened was that there was stuff going on the news all the time. The news kind of went out of its way to focus on uh, inner city violence and problems with the inner city, and because of racial attitudes and common beliefs at the time, nobody stopped to think about what was happening to the people who lived in the inner city, or why these individuals sometimes had higher crime rates, etc. They just sort of talked about the crime. And sure enough, unfortunately, what a lot of these young men and women were wearing was kind of urban wear. And so at first, the emotional reaction of surprise and maybe even anger was related to the behaviors they were seeing. But of course, over the years, what ended up happening was anybody who was wearing that kind of clothing ended up eliciting a classical conditioned reaction that was really created by the media and racism, if I'm being honest. However, right around the same time that this was happening, um, young people were having a different reaction. It was still the same clothing styles. And again, to young people, at first, there was no reaction to that. People just dressed the way they dress. Um, but over the years, unlike the older people in the 80s and 90s, young people uh, saw urban wear being worn by people they really loved, artists, rappers, and really all throughout uh, the 80s and 90s, the same thing was happening. And the unconditioned response of liking was really related more to the individuals wearing the clothes, right? What they did, what they rapped about, what they talked about, the fact that maybe the clothes looked specifically good, Um, but what ended up happening is almost the exact same thing, just the opposite reaction. Now, young people had a conditioned response to urban wear, but it was a positive conditioned response. And so, again, what we think about as being something that maybe you came to on your own, what kind of style you like, is very often related to classical conditioning that is sort of pressed upon us by the media. And whether we're talking about artists or fashion, in either case, usually it is somebody in the background playing with our neutral stimuli and our unconditioned responses so that they can condition a specific response to a stimulus. Now, the same thing is true with operant conditioning, right? Rewards and punishments increase the likelihood that you're going to like or dislike something. And so some behaviors naturally give you a reward. Unfortunately, smoking gives you a tiny little buzz, but it is a reward, a reinforcement. And so what happens is you end up increasing that behavior and that attitude sometimes. We'll talk a little bit about how behavior sometimes affects cognitive attitudes. Again, here's a behavior that you might think is good, studying, but sometimes studying brings with it just a natural punishment. You get frustrated, you get angry, and there you are. You're supposed to be studying, but now you're absolutely not because the behavior has decreased. And again, this is something that a lot of us think of as being something that is inborn or natural. Some of us think that we're better studiers or not good at studying, but a lot of times these behaviors are sort of learned behaviors. Sure enough, sometimes you study and you pass the test or you learn something new, and that is its own reward. And so, in turn, that might increase the behavior. But oftentimes, our attitudes are completely learned. Observational learning is something also that uh, will teach us certain attitudes that we think of as our own attitudes, but in reality have been put in there by others. Um, this is why oftentimes if you come from a sporty family, everyone likes sports, everyone does them. A lot of times that person or those young people in that family grow up to enjoy sports. If you're from a family that loves fashion and art, again, you tend to also gravitate to those things. And if you come from a family who likes to play games together, etc. Now, you'll often find one or two people in every family that they're not like the others, right? Everybody else plays sports, but they don't. Everybody else likes fashion, but they don't. And usually that is going to come from classical and operant conditioning. So, there you are trying to do something with mom in fashion and you mess up your nails or whatever, and mom gets really angry. Well, all of a sudden, what's happened is that she's punished you, and you're less likely to like that. And if that happens over and over throughout your life, then you might stop liking the things your parents like. But overall, it's usually the case that if we observe our parents and our family doing and liking one thing, we also tend to do and like those same things. Um, it's not just your family either. Your friendships are like this as well. Uh, this is why it's very common to see groups of friends that are incredibly similar to each other. They often dress similarly. They often listen to the same kinds of music. They might even have similar slang. It's also why it's very uncommon to see people who are friends but very different from one another. You very rarely find in real life friends like the friends from recess, where one or two of them are sporty and one or two of them are kind of nerdy and one or two of them are slackers. That really just doesn't happen. eventually, after a while of hanging out together, either they're not gonna mesh well, or some of them are going to learn to switch their attitudes to fit their friends more closely, and they're going to start looking more and more like each other. It's unfortunate that that's the case, but it is very common that that happens.